just make a last statement about, I don't want to get on the socialist rant and talk about it for 50 years. If you want to go to a good college and they have a good department of history or possibly political philosophy, there's a whole tradition, of socialism, probably going way back to the ancient Greeks. The Pythagoreans had a socialistic community of people who were interested in mathematics, and they were interested in a life together where they agreed on the fundamental things. So I wanted to get to the fact that socialism means some sort of agreement among the group of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 people. Some sort of agreement, Maybe if it were a group of philosophers, the agreement would be that you don't talk about God because that ends up dividing you, and it ends up causing people to have disputes and differences of opinion that cause you to not have as much respect for other people. Maybe you decide that you can talk about that, and that that's precisely what you're interested in, and that kind of binds you together, that you're all interested in talking about theology. And then you can have those kinds of discussions whenever you want to, and you can have them more often than just a professor who might be studying that subject. He might have a degree from the University of Chicago, which is one of the best universities in the world to have a theology degree from, but he might realize, wow, I'm a professor, I'm a professor at the Sorbonne in France, but I don't get to have very interesting conversations with anybody about theology except my students. But I'd actually like to live in community where I can frequently talk to people about theology. You may be a clergyman around here, but you don't get to theorize about God with others, because the accepted thing is you accept God and you accept the doctrines about God, and then you get to participate in the church. Because that's following the rules. Your community existence, if you found a commune, that might be different. You agree on basic things. You don't put together, say, 10 people who are rabidly opposed to abortion and then 10 people who favor it. You start out with the right materials, like Plato and the Statesman. His Statesman kind of weaves together the community, or all the strands of the community, and by weaving together the right strands, he gets the community that's functional. That's what the Pythagoreans had to do. Initially, they had to get the right people together, otherwise you're going to have conflict. But you start out with, we're not going to have much conflict because we agree on some of the fundamentals. We agree that it's really cool to ride motorcycles, for one thing. We agree because we purchased this property out here and it's got this nice trail out back here. And so we can ride motorcycles out there. And some of us who don't have our license, we can actually ride a motorcycle around the trail out back. And so we still get to participate in that. We still get to be part of the motorcycle club, but we're not on the highway yet. We'd like to be eventually. But, it might be, that might be the interest at first. It might be like disaffected philosophers who would like to ride motorcycles, or artists, who would like to paint with some others and learn the skill. I mentioned refurbishing automobiles. A lot of things you can do, producing beef jerky and then selling it, at trade. Any kinds of trading things where you're actually getting involved in something, and then you set up a flea market. So you've got your society and it's got 4 to 8 houses. You have your community area. On the weekends, one day, you have a flea market there. And people come there and they trade things with you, and you're able to build up in that way. And that's something you have in common with the other people. What I like about it is that as people age, it provides the kind of support for other people that they need, and they don't end up in nursing homes like a lot of old people do. So you've got maybe a few elderly people that are aging in your community. They're, females or males in their 70s, but they still can do things. Like the guy can work on mowers, or he can do some other thing, and then they feel like they're part of the society, rather than what I noticed, at the nursing home where my mom was, where they did a very good job of taking care of her, in my opinion. But she, like other people there, that they don't have a social form of existence. They have isolated existence, and then sometimes they bring them together and they try to, you just can't do it the way you could if there were 5, 10, 15, or 20 people, or 50 people. Then it would be easier to actually bring them and make them part of everything. So I like it because it provides some of the things that need to be provided for society, and but it also points to the fact that some people are already able to live this way, and that has something to do with resources. So where you light on resources, you have to be more intensely committed to providing, like, whatever, the labor. So if I said I'm going to be the cook of this community, and there's people there that work all day, then I'm going to work hard to make sure that they have a good meal, because that's something they need. Because it's something that if they work their job as a doctor or as a nurse or as a mechanic or as a teacher, they're going to come home and they're going to need to eat. And at present, they might not be married, and they might come home and they have to spend 2 hours or an hour and a half cooking a meal, whereas if they didn't, they could sit down, eat the meal, and they could be studying what they needed to know for the next day's classes, because somebody provides somebody cooks for them, But was just an example, Any number of kinds of things are possible, but they do involve, since they involve intense. See, the more social you get, the more you will have tension, friction, disagreement about things. It has to be the right people, and they have to agree on the basics. I call it the numerable and the nameable. You agree on what the numerable and the nameable are in the world. You try to have as much agreement to begin with, like in a religion when they start a religion. Like a religion always begins and there's no conflict, because everybody's, all the disciples of Jesus, for example, they were all like, hey, we all believe that Jesus' teachings were great. And they didn't have any disagreement for a long time until everybody got so far away from the experiences of the actual person that they could no longer ask someone, what does this mean? And then, then they created doctrines. This is what this means. This is what this means. And then people started disputing over the doctrines, which is why you can't have a community that's too large, and why you can't have a community that begins with no thought about what each person believes. So maybe it means sacrificing some of your beliefs when you go into it, because you're not going to be disputing. Like maybe, one of the requirements is that you don't get intensely political, because then some people are going to say, well, we ought to have a revolution, or we ought to be, we ought to be like a demonstrating intensely political committee. But then that takes so much time away from everybody, that the whole idea was that they were learning and they were feeling in peace in nature. This is another thing. This would be something I would make part of a commune if I started, or if I tried to found the ideas for it. The first thing would be a kind of harmony in nature, and a not feeling tension toward the government, and a not feeling like you got to protest or you got to overthrow something, or it would be like turning away from those things, because I have hypertension, I have high blood pressure, I don't have the best of health. Exercise is good for me. Sunshine is good for me. A lot of things are good for me that could be provided, and they have nothing to do with me getting my heart rate up, getting intense about something, getting mad about something that I really cannot change. I quite frankly cannot change that. Even if I had an enormous amount of money in the United States today, if I were a millionaire, for instance, I would not have that much money. I would not have that much power to change politics. So, some people are political, and they'd say, hey, our commune is going to be political because that's what we choose, and we're going to be involved in these or those lobbies, and we're going to lobby for a better environment. I know I have friends in the university like Mylan Engel and Nathan Nobis, who are interested in environmental issues, interested in getting people not to eat meat, interested in those kinds of things. You know, if Mylan and Nathan start a commune, then maybe they're going to have certain requirements. Like the people who join are going to be vegetarians, or people who are willing to be converted to vegetarians. They're people who are sensible about philosophy. They're people who don't hate philosophy. You know, they're people who are willing to discuss an issue, because you meet some people in life and they don't even want to talk. You know, you bring up an issue like, hey, what is God or whatever, and they're just like, don't give me any of that. And then there's other people who are like, they dive right into a conversation like that, and they like that. You know, so you have to have some fundamental agreement. You know, maybe the men have a different agreement, different beliefs, and the women say, well, the women are they're not being discriminated against, but they say when they're into that topic, whatever it is, then we're not part of that, because we don't like that as much. You know, but it's through talking to other people, through engaging in conversations and writing your constitution, if you will. You know, that's how you establish what your meanings are, what the numerable and the nameable is, you know, and what maybe the unnameable is. And, you know, that's what I mean when I'm referring to Pythagoras when I say that, because the Pythagoreans, they had a way of only talking about things, creating agreement, because they only talked about the things that they thought were real. So then they never had a discussion where one of them was saying, you know, the number 3 isn't God, and then one of them was saying the number 3 is God. You know, so they never had that disagreement. So they avoided a lot of tension in their community in that way. Now, you might not want to be that rigid either, you know, because if you start off with the idea that, hey, these people are vaguely thoughtful and philosophical, then of course there's going to be discussion. You know, then there's allowance for disagreement, but they're the type of people who have tolerance. You know, so that's part of it. You build a tolerant community. And that's what sometimes doesn't happen in society today, because people don't meet other people that are like that, or they never met anybody that suggested that to them. I know a lot of elderly people in this community, they have a lot of savings money. And one of them lives in one house, and one of them lives in another house, and another one lives in another house, but nobody came along who said, hey, what about you sharing your resources with 2 or 3 other people and then actually building a common community? And what happens there is that people fear that if they put their money in, they'll lose their money. And so that it has to be people that are trustworthy, and it has to be people that's why it can't be too large. Because if it's too large, then the people don't know each other. And the whole idea is that everybody knows each other. So you have that kind of like familial or family feeling or rooted feeling, because you're building something together.